Hello and welcome to Natural Word English. If this is your first time here, this channel exists for one simple reason: to help you sound like yourself in English, not like a translation of yourself. And today's topic goes straight at something almost every advanced learner struggles with, even after years of study. You know the grammar. You know thousands of words. But somewhere between the thought forming in your head and the words coming out of your mouth, there's a delay. A tiny pause where you're quietly converting your first language into English before you speak. And that pause is exactly what keeps you sounding hesitant, even when your English is actually very good. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Fluent speakers aren't fluent because they know more grammar rules than you. They're fluent because they've stopped translating. They think directly in English using vocabulary that's so wired into real situations that the words arrive before the translation even has a chance to start. That's the method we're using today. Not vocabulary lists, not flashcards. Real advanced vocabulary, C1 to C2 level, attached directly to the situations where you'd actually need it, so that the next time you're in that situation, the word is simply there, waiting, already yours. Say, by the end of this lesson, you will have around 60 new expressions living in your active vocabulary, not your passive memory. We're going to cover how to describe your reactions the instant they happen, how to talk about people's personalities with precision instead of vague words like nice or good, how to sound sharp and capable in a work conversation, how to disagree without sounding rude, how to describe tricky situations clearly, and along the way, we're going to train your ear with real connected speech, real shadowing, and real listening for meaning practice. Because vocabulary without natural pronunciation is only half the skill. So get comfortable. Keep your voice ready to use out loud, because this lesson only works if you speak, not just listen. Let's begin. Let's start with the fastest way to stop translating: reaction vocabulary. Think about it. Almost every day something happens, and your very first internal response is an emotional word. Something good happens. Something annoying happens. Something confusing happens. If that first word is still stuck in your first language, everything you say next gets built on a delay. So, we're going to rebuild that first reaction in English directly. Here's our first word: overwhelmed. It means having so much to deal with. Whether it's emotions, work, or information that you can barely process at all. It upgrades a basic word like stressed, but it's more specific. Because overwhelmed suggests there's simply too much all at once. Listen to it in a sentence. Honestly, I felt completely overwhelmed on my first day. At the new job, there was just so much information. Now say that with me, out loud. I felt completely overwhelmed. Again, a little faster. I felt completely overwhelmed. Good. Let's build a short scene around it. Imagine this. It's Monday morning. Your inbox has 90 unread emails. Your phone won't stop buzzing. And your manager just added another meeting to your calendar. You sit down, take a breath, and say to a colleague passing by, "Overwhelmed? I don't think that even covers it." Now here's a mini dialogue. Two people, and I want you to notice how naturally overwhelmed fits into a real exchange. Person A: "You look exhausted. Everything okay?" Person B: "Honestly, I'm a bit overwhelmed. We got 3 new projects this week, and I haven't even finished the last one." Person A: "Do you want me to take one of them off your plate?" Person B: "Would you? That would genuinely help. I just need to catch my breath." Person A: "Consider it done. Which one's the least urgent?" Person B: "The client report. It's not due until Friday." Notice how natural that felt. Nobody said, "I am experiencing high levels of stress." They said, "I'm a bit overwhelmed." Short, direct, human. That's the target level we're aiming for throughout this lesson. Next word: apprehensive. This means feeling worried or nervous about something that's about to happen. Usually something uncertain. It's more precise than just saying scared, because apprehensive often includes a mix of worry and anticipation, not pure fear. For example, "I was a little apprehensive before the interview, but once it started, I relaxed." Repeat after me. "I was apprehensive." Once more, with the stress in the right place. "I was apprehensive." Good. That middle syllable carries the weight. Let's do a quick visualization before the next dialogue. Picture this. You're standing outside a meeting room, about to present your ideas to senior leadership for the first time. Your hand is on the door handle. This is exactly the kind of moment where apprehensive lives. Person A: "You seem quiet today. Big presentation coming up?" Person B: "Yeah, in 20 minutes, actually. I'll admit, I'm feeling pretty apprehensive about it." Person A: "That's completely normal. What's making you most nervous?" Person B: "Honestly, the Q&A afterward. I can prepare my slides, but I can't prepare for every question." Person A: "Fair enough. But you know this material better than anyone in that room." Person B: "You're right. I just need to remind myself of that before I walk in." Now, let's move to a positive reaction word, because fluency isn't only about handling stress, it's also about expressing genuine excitement without sounding childish. The word is elated. It means extremely happy, often because of some specific good news or achievement. It's a strong upgrade from happy, reserved for moments that genuinely matter. For example, she was elated when she found out she got the scholarship. Repeat. Elated. One more time. Notice the stress on the second syllable, elated. Quick self-practice moment. I want you to think of one piece of good news you received recently, even something small, and say out loud, using today's word, "I was elated when." Pause the video for a few seconds if you need to, and finish that sentence in your own words. Go ahead. Say it out loud right now. Let's move to another everyday reaction. Taken aback. This is a phrase, not a single word, and it means to be surprised or shocked, usually in a way that briefly stops you from responding. For example, I was taken aback by how blunt he was in the meeting. Notice this phrase doesn't change form easily. It's always taken aback. So just memorize it as one chunk. Repeat, taken aback. Now in a full sentence, I was honestly taken aback by that comment. Here's a longer dialogue that combines several of these reaction words. And this time, I want you to actively participate. I'll read both sides first so you hear the natural flow, and then I'll ask you to take one role yourself. Person A, how did the feedback session go? Person B, it was intense. My manager pointed out some things I completely missed. Person A, were you taken aback by any of it? Person B, a little, yeah. I didn't expect the criticism about my communication style. Person A, that must have been tough to hear. Person B, it was, but honestly, once I got past feeling a bit overwhelmed, I realized it was useful. Now, let's switch roles. I'll read Person A's lines, and this time you answer as Person B using your own words, but try to include at least one of today's vocabulary words if you can. Ready? Person A, how did the feedback session go? Pause here and answer out loud as Person B. Take your time. Good. Whatever you said, that's real practice. That's exactly the muscle we're training. Let's continue. One more reaction word before we move to the next section. Disheartened. It means feeling discouraged or losing hope, usually after some kind of setback. It's stronger and more literary than just sad, and it works especially well in professional or personal growth contexts. For example, he felt disheartened after his proposal was rejected for the third time. Repeat, disheartened. Notice the stress, disheartened, right in the middle, connected to the word heart, which makes it easier to remember, since it literally means your heart loses its courage. Let's do a quick connected speech note here, because this is exactly the kind of detail that separates advanced learners from native-sounding speakers. When native speakers say, he felt disheartened, the words often blend together. Listen to the slow version first. He felt disheartened. Now the natural, connected version. He feel disheartened, almost like one long word, because the T at the end of felt softens and connects directly into disheartened. Try saying it slowly first, then speed it up to match natural rhythm. Slowly, he felt disheartened. Now naturally, he felt disheartened. That small connection is what makes spoken English sound smooth instead of choppy. Let's take a short pause here, a calmer moment before we move into the next section. Close your eyes for a second. If you're somewhere comfortable, take a breath and just repeat quietly to yourself the 5 words we've covered so far. Overwhelmed, apprehensive, elated, taken aback, disheartened. Say them slowly, one at a time, and notice how each one carries a slightly different emotional weight. That's the goal, not just knowing a synonym, but feeling the specific shade of meaning each word carries. Nice work getting through that first block. You've already added 5 precise, native-level reaction words to your vocabulary, words that most textbooks skip entirely because they focus on basic feelings instead of real emotional nuance. Let's build on that momentum and move into our next cluster. Describing people's personalities with real precision. So often, learners describe people using only nice, good, smart, or bad. Native, advanced speakers almost never rely on those words alone because they don't say much. If I told you my coworker is nice, you'd learn almost nothing about them. But if I told you my coworker is meticulous, you'd immediately understand something specific and useful. Let's start there. Meticulous means paying extreme attention to detail, being very careful and precise, sometimes almost to a perfectionist level. For example, she's incredibly meticulous. She checks every number in the report twice before sending it. Repeat. Meticulous. Say it a bit faster now. Meticulous. Good. Notice the stress falls on the second syllable, meticulous. Here's a mini dialogue using this word in a workplace context. Imagine 2 colleagues discussing a new team member. Person A, how's the new analyst working out? Person B, really well, actually. She's extremely meticulous, catches mistakes nobody else even notices. Person A, that's exactly what we need on this team. Person B, agreed. Slower at first, but the accuracy makes up for it completely. Next word, resourceful. This describes someone who's good at finding quick, clever solutions to problems, especially when resources or options are limited. For example, when the printer broke right before the meeting, he was resourceful enough to send everyone the file digitally instead. Repeat. Resourceful. One more time. Resourceful. Quick visualization before we continue. Imagine you're traveling and your flight gets suddenly canceled. The person next to you calmly pulls out their phone, rebooks a different route through another city, and finds a hotel deal within 5 minutes. That's resourcefulness in action. Let's practice a longer dialogue here. 4 to 6 exchanges, and I want you to notice how naturally this vocabulary appears in a believable conversation. Person A. I heard the server crashed right before the client demo yesterday. Person B. It did. Total panic for about 2 minutes. Person A. How did you guys manage it? Person B. Honestly, Marcus saved us. He's incredibly resourceful. He pulled up a backup version from his laptop and ran the whole demo from there. Person A. That's impressive under that kind of pressure. Person B. Exactly. The client never even noticed anything went wrong. Now, let's switch roles again. I'll read Person A, and I want you to answer as Person B, describing someone you know who's resourceful in your own words, out loud. Person A, do you know anyone who's really good at solving problems on the spot without much help? Pause now and answer as yourself. Whatever example you came up with. That's genuinely useful practice because you just used real vocabulary to describe a real person from your own life, which is exactly how this word will stay in your memory long after this video ends. Let's continue with another essential personality word. Ma, assertive. This means expressing your opinions or needs clearly and confidently, without being aggressive or rude. It's a word that many learners confuse with aggressive. So let's be precise. Aggressive means forceful in a negative, sometimes hostile way, while assertive means confident and direct in a respectful way. For example, she was assertive in the negotiation. She stated her price clearly and didn't back down, but she stayed completely professional. Repeat, assertive. Notice the stress, assertive. Here's a quick pronunciation and intonation note. When we say something assertively in English, our intonation tends to stay flatter and more controlled, not rising nervously at the end like a question. Compare these two versions. Nervous, rising intonation. I think, maybe, we should push the deadline. Now, assertive, controlled intonation. I think we should push the deadline. Same words. Try saying that assertive version yourself, keeping your voice steady and confident. I think we should push the deadline. Let's add one more personality word to round out this block. Easygoing. This describes someone relaxed, calm, and not easily bothered or stressed by small problems. It's the opposite of someone who's uptight or overly anxious about details. For example, my roommate is really easygoing. Nothing seems to bother him, even when plans change last minute. Repeat. Easygoing, said as one smooth word. Easygoing. Let's do a comparison drill, since comparisons are one of the fastest ways to lock new vocabulary into long-term memory. Compare two coworkers. My manager is meticulous. She notices every small error, while my teammate is more easygoing. He doesn't stress about minor details as long as the big picture works out. Notice how naturally these words work together in contrast. Try building your own comparison sentence right now, out loud, using two of today's personality words to describe two people you actually know. You're doing genuinely strong work so far. In just the first part of this lesson, you've already picked up 9 precise, natural expressions, 5 for describing your immediate emotional reactions, and 4 for describing personality with real accuracy. That's real progress, and we're only getting started. Let's shift now into vocabulary for the workplace, because this is where a lot of advanced learners feel the most pressure to sound competent, and honestly, where a strong vocabulary makes the biggest visible difference. Our next word is streamline. This means to make a process simpler, faster, and more efficient by removing unnecessary steps. For example, we managed to streamline the approval process. It used to take 5 steps. Now it only takes 2. Repeat, streamline. Say it in a full sentence. We need to streamline this workflow. Let's build a visualization here. Imagine you're in a meeting where your team is drowning in an overly complicated approval system. 5 different people need to sign off on every single small decision, and nothing moves quickly. Someone finally says, "Honestly, we just need to streamline this entire process." That's the exact real-world moment this word belongs to. Here's a dialogue using it naturally. Person A: "Why does it take 2 weeks just to get a purchase approved around here?" Person B: "I know. It's painful. Too many people in the chain." Person A: "Has anyone proposed streamlining it?" Person B: "Actually, yes. I'd suggested cutting it down to just manager approval for anything under $500. Person A: "That would save everyone so much time." Person B: "Exactly what I said. Hopefully leadership agrees." Next word: prioritize. This means to decide which tasks are most important and deal with those first. For example, with so many deadlines this week, I really had to prioritize. The client project came first. Everything else waited. Repeat. Prioritize. One more time. Notice the stress. Prioritize. Quick reaction response. Drill here. This trains your ability to answer instantly instead of pausing. I'll ask you a question, and I want you to answer immediately, out loud, using the word prioritize. Ready? If you had 5 tasks due today and only enough time for 3, what would you do? Answer right now. Don't overthink it. Just speak. Whatever you said, notice that you just use the word naturally, under a small amount of time pressure, exactly like a real conversation. That instant response reflex is what we're training throughout this entire video. Let's add delegate. This means to give a task, score, or responsibility to someone else, usually someone on your team, instead of doing it all yourself. For example, a good manager knows how to delegate. She doesn't try to do everything alone. Repeat. Delegate. Notice the stress falls on the first syllable. Delegate. Here's an important distinction between delegate as a verb and a very common learner mistake. Many learners say, "I gave the task," or "I assigned the task," which are fine, but delegate specifically implies trust a slightly more sophisticated responsibility than simply assigning. For instance, you delegate authority, not just tasks. She delegated the client relationship to her deputy while she focused on the bigger accounts. Let's build a longer role-play scenario here, since this is exactly the kind of situation you might face at work. Imagine you're a team lead, overwhelmed with tasks, and you need to have a conversation with your manager about redistributing your workload. I'll play your manager, and I want you to respond as yourself, using prioritize or delegate. Naturally, in your answer, be Allerger. You seem to be carrying a lot right now. How's your workload looking? Pause here and answer as yourself. Out loud, explaining how you'd handle a heavy workload using today's vocabulary. Nice work. Whether you talked about prioritizing your most urgent tasks or delegating some responsibilities to a teammate, you just handled a completely realistic workplace conversation. using advanced vocabulary in real time without translating first. That's the entire goal of this method. Let's add 2 more sharp workplace expressions before we move into our next section. First, to be on the same page. This phrase means that 2 or more people understand or agree on something in the same way. For example, before we start the project, let's make sure we're all on the same page about the timeline. Repeat, on the same page. And second, to touch base. This means to make brief contact with someone, usually to check on progress or share a quick update. For example, let's touch base again on Friday to see how things are progressing. Repeat, touch base. Notice both of these are extremely common in real offices, yet many textbooks skip them entirely in favor of more formal, less natural alternatives. Let's do a quick shadowing drill since we've now built up a good number of expressions. That, its own jawed, and shadowing is one of the fastest ways to make them stick in both your memory and your pronunciation. Shadowing means listening to a sentence and repeating it back immediately. Right on top of the audio, copying the rhythm, stress, and speed as closely as possible, not waiting until after the sentence finishes. Let's practice with one of today's sentences. I'll say it once, slowly, then twice at natural speed, and each time I want you to repeat immediately after me, almost overlapping. Slowly. Let's touch base again on Friday. Now, natural speed, repeat immediately. Let's touch base again on Friday. One more time, a little faster. Let's touch base again on Friday. That immediate, overlapping repetition is different from just repeating after me with a pause. It trains your mouth and ear to work together in real time, which is exactly what happens in a live conversation where you don't get a pause before you need to respond. We've covered a solid foundation so far: reaction vocabulary, personality vocabulary, and workplace vocabulary, complete with real dialogues, role play, and pronunciation. Practice. In the next part of this lesson, we're going deeper into vocabulary for expressing opinions with nuance, describing tricky or ambiguous situations, and a full section dedicated entirely to natural, connected speech and listening skills, the kind of detail that makes the biggest difference in how natural you actually sound. Stay with me. Keep speaking out loud, and let's keep building. Let's move into vocabulary for expressing opinions with real nuance, because this is a place where a lot of advanced learners default to painfully simple structures like, I think it's good, or I don't agree, when in reality, native speakers rarely state opinions in such flat, absolute terms. They soften, they qualify, they hedge, and that nuance is what makes an opinion sound thoughtful instead of blunt. Let's start with a phrase. To a certain extent. This means that something is partly true, but not completely. It's a way of agreeing without fully committing. For example, I agree with you to a certain extent, but I think the deadline is still unrealistic. Repeat. To a certain extent. Say the full sentence. I agree to a certain extent. Here's a quick note on intonation, because this phrase is often misused by learners who say it too flatly, making it sound almost sarcastic. When native speakers use to a certain extent, there's usually a slight pause before it, and the voice softens slightly, signaling, I'm about to add a condition. Listen to the difference. Flat, almost robotic. I agree to a certain extent. Now natural, with a small pause and softer tone. I agree to a certain extent. Try saying it that second way yourself, with the pause built in. Next expression. I'd argue that. This is a slightly more formal, confident way to introduce your own opinion, especially when you're gently disagreeing with someone or are offering an alternative view. For example, I'd argue that remote work actually increases productivity for most people, not decreases it. Repeat. I'd argue that. One more time faster. I'd argue that. Let's build a dialogue here, imagining two coworkers with slightly different opinions about a work policy, TD, and I want you to notice how respectfully disagreement happens using this vocabulary. Person A. Honestly, I think everyone should be back in the office full time. Person B. I'd argue that depends heavily on the role. Some jobs genuinely work better remotely. Person A. Maybe. But I think collaboration suffers without face-to-face contact. Person B. To a certain extent, sure, but video calls have gotten a lot better at closing that gap. Person A. Fair point. I hadn't thought about it that way. Person B. It's definitely not black and white either way. Notice that neither person got defensive or aggressive. They used precise vocabulary to disagree while staying completely respectful. That's a skill in itself, separate from grammar, and it's exactly what phrases like these are built for. Let's add, on the flip side. This phrase introduces a contrasting point, similar to on the other hand, but slightly more casual and commonly used in spoken English. For example, the new software saves us a lot of time. On the flip side, it took weeks to train everyone on how to use it. Repeat, on the flip side. Now, let's do a quick self-practice moment using this phrase. I want you to think of any decision you've made recently, big or small, and describe one positive and one negative side of it using on the flip side. For example, you might say something about a purchase, a schedule change, anything at all. Pause here and say your sentence out loud right now, using the structure. Something good. On the flip side, something less ideal. Great work. That kind of balanced, two-sided thinking is exactly what makes an opinion sound mature and considered rather than one-dimensional. Let's add one more nuance phrase. That said. This is used to introduce a contrasting idea right after making a point, similar to however, but shorter and more natural in spoken conversation. For example, the project was delayed by almost a month. That said, the final result was worth the wait. Repeat, that said. Notice how compact it is. Just two words doing the job of a full contrasting clause. Let's practice combining several of these opinion phrases together in one longer response. Because in real conversations, native speakers often stack these naturally, one right after another. I'll give you a topic, and I want you to speak for about 30 seconds, trying to use at least two of today's opinion phrases. Your topic. Is it better to work in a big company or a small company? Take a moment and speak your answer out loud now, using phrases like, to a certain extent, I'd argue that, on the flip side, or that said. However your answer sounded, notice something important. You weren't translating a full paragraph from your first language and then converting it. You were building your opinion directly using preloaded English structures, connecting them as you spoke. That's the exact mental shift this entire lesson is designed to create. Now let's move into our next cluster. Vocabulary, for describing tricky, unclear, or difficult situations. Because this is another area where beginner-level words like difficult or confusing get overused when much more precise options exist. Let's start with daunting. This describes something that feels intimidating or overwhelming because of its size, difficulty, or importance, usually before you've even started it. For example, the idea of learning a new language from scratch felt daunting at first, but I broke it into small daily steps. Repeat, daunting. Notice the stress, daunting. Let's build a visualization here. Imagine standing at the base of a mountain you're about to climb, looking straight up. You can't see the top. That physical feeling, that's exactly the emotional territory. Daunting lives in, even when we're talking about something like a huge project at work, not an actual mountain. Here's a dialogue. Person A, how's the new certification exam prep going? Person B, honestly, it feels a bit daunting. There's so much material to cover in just 6 weeks. Person A, have you made a study schedule yet? Person B, not yet, but I think breaking it into smaller topics would make it feel less overwhelming. Person A, that's usually the best approach with anything daunting, small pieces instead of the whole mountain at once. Next word, ambiguous. This means unclear, having more than one possible meaning or interpretation, which creates confusion. For example, the instructions in the email were pretty ambiguous. I honestly wasn't sure if the deadline was Friday or the following Monday. Repeat, ambiguous. One more time, notice the stress. Ambiguous. Here's an important distinction worth mentioning, since learners sometimes confuse ambiguous with vague. Vague usually means lacking detail or being too general, while ambiguous specifically means open to multiple interpretations. It's more precise than simply unclear. For instance, a vague answer gives too little information, while an ambiguous answer could genuinely be understood 2 different ways. Let's practice a role play here. Imagining you received an ambiguous message from a colleague, and you need to clarify it. I'll read the ambiguous message first. Let's catch up sometime next week about the project. Maybe Tuesday works. Now, imagine you need to respond, asking for clarification, since maybe and sometime. Leave things unclear. Pause here and say your response out loud, asking a clarifying question naturally in your own words. Whatever you asked, that kind of clarifying question is something advanced. Speakers do constantly and confidently rather than just guessing and hoping for the best, which is often what less confident speakers do out of fear of asking again. Let's add to resolve. This means to find a solution to a problem or to settle a disagreement completely. For example, after a long discussion, they finally resolved the disagreement about the budget. Repeat, resolve. And let's pair it with a related expression, to get the bottom of something. This means to investigate something fully until you understand the real cause or truth behind it. For example, we need to get to the bottom of why the server keeps crashing every Monday morning. Repeat, get to the bottom of it. Notice this phrase is especially common when something confusing or frustrating keeps happening repeatedly and someone is determined to find the real reason. Here's a longer dialogue combining several of today's tricky situation words. Fee, feedy, fee, feeden, with a role switch moment built in. Person A, this bug has been happening for 3 weeks now, and nobody can explain it. Person B, I know. It's incredibly frustrating. The reports we're getting are honestly pretty ambiguous. Person A, right. Half of them say it happens on login. The other half say it's random. Person B, we really need to get to the bottom of this before the client notices. Person A, agreed. I know it feels daunting, but let's break it into smaller pieces and test one theory at a time. Person B, that's fair. Let's start with the login theory first. Now, your turn. I'll read Person A's opening line again, and I want you to respond as Person B using at least one of today's tricky situation words in your own words. Person A, honestly, I have no idea why this keeps happening. Pause and respond now, out loud. Good work. Whatever you said, notice how much more specific and professional it sounds compared to simply saying it's confusing or it's a problem, which is what most learners default to when they haven't built this kind of vocabulary yet. Now, let's shift gears completely for a moment and go deep into something most vocabulary lessons skip entirely. Real listening skills, connected speech, and shadowing, because knowing a word means nothing if you can't recognize it when a native says it quickly, with all its sounds blending together. Let's start with stress patterns in full sentences. Since English relies heavily on stressing certain words to carry meaning, while other words get almost swallowed. Take this sentence we used earlier. What are you doing today? Native speakers rarely pronounce every word with equal weight. Instead, it often sounds like, Whatcha doin' today? With doing and today carrying the stress, while what are you compresses down into something much faster and softer. Listen to the difference. Careful, textbook pronunciation. What are you doing today? Now natural, connected pronunciation. What you doing today? Try saying that faster, connected version yourself, right now, out loud. Let's do another one, using vocabulary from earlier in this lesson. The phrase, on the same page, often connects into something closer to on the same page, with the almost disappearing into a quick, unstressed sound. Slowly, on the same page. Now naturally, on the same page. Faster, smoother, no gap between the words. Try it yourself a few times, gradually speeding up. Here's another common connection pattern worth knowing. When a word ending in a consonant is followed by a word starting with a vowel. Na. Native speakers often link them together as if they were one word. Take the phrase, get to the bottom of it. Notice how of it often blends into something like of it, almost like one word, not two separate ones. Slowly, of it, naturally, connected, of it. Full phrase, connected. Get to the bottom of it, said quickly, almost like get to the bottom of it. Try that yourself, slowly first, then speeding up until it feels natural. Now, let's talk about a crucial listening skill. Catching the main idea when someone speaks quickly without needing to understand every single word. This is one of the biggest sources of anxiety for advanced learners, the fear of missing something. But here's the truth. Even native speakers don't catch every word in fast, casual speech. They rely on context, keywords, and natural filler responses to keep the conversation moving smoothly without panicking or ask for repetition every time. For example, imagine someone speaks quickly and you catch most of it, but not every single word. Instead of freezing or asking them to repeat everything, you can respond naturally with phrases like, I see, that makes sense, right, or got it. Phrases that show you're following the general meaning, even if a few words slipped past you. This buys you time, keeps the conversation flowing, and honestly, it's exactly fluent speakers do constantly, even in their first language. Let's practice this directly. I'm going to say a slightly longer, faster sentence, and I don't want you to try to catch every single word. Just listen for the main idea and respond naturally afterward with one of those phrases. Here it comes at a natural, slightly faster pace. So basically what happened was the client changed their mind again at the last minute, which means we're back to square one on the whole proposal. Now, without repeating it back word for word, just respond naturally, out loud, with something like I see or that makes sense, as if you were really in that conversation. Perfect. That's the exact reflex we're training, the ability to stay in a conversation smoothly without freezing just because you didn't catch 100% of what was said. Let's do one more shadowing round before we shift into practical, everyday self-practice. This time, I'll give you a full sentence combining several pieces of natural rhythm and connected speech. And I want you to shadow it, meaning repeat it immediately, almost overlapping with my voice, not waiting until I finish. Ready? Slowly first. I think, to a certain extent, we need to get to the bottom of this before it becomes a bigger issue. Now, at natural speed, shadow this immediately as I say it. I think, to a certain extent, we need to get to the bottom of this before it becomes a bigger issue. One more time. Try to match the rhythm and stress as closely as you can. Excellent work pushing through that. Real shadowing is tiring. At first, because it forces your brain, your ears, and your mouth to work together in real time, exactly the way they need to during an actual conversation. So if that felt challenging, that's a good sign. It means you're training the right muscle. Now, let's move into a self-practice exercise that I want you to genuinely carry with you after this video ends, because this is the technique that turns passive vocabulary into active, automatic vocabulary. It's simple. Describing your immediate surroundings out loud using the vocabulary you're learning in the moment without preparation. Right now, wherever you are, I want you to look around for a few seconds and notice three things, using at least one piece of vocabulary from today's lesson if you can. For example, you might say something like, "This room feels a bit overwhelming right now. There's clutter everywhere." Or, "My desk is meticulously organized today." Or, honestly, "This task feels daunting, but I'm going to break it into smaller steps." Pause the video now, look around wherever you are, and say 2 or 3 sentences out loud describing your surroundings or your current task. Using today's vocabulary naturally, whatever you said, notice something important. You just used C1 to C2 level vocabulary spontaneously, describing your real environment with 0 preparation and 0 translation. That's not a classroom exercise anymore. That's the actual skill working in real time. And if you build this 5-minute habit into your day, even just once, this vocabulary will move from words I recognize to words I automatically reach for, which is the entire transformation this channel is built around. We've covered an enormous amount of ground so far. Reaction vocabulary, personality vocabulary, workplace vocabulary, nuanced opinion vocabulary, vocabulary for tricky situations, and a full deep dive into connected speech, shadowing, and listening for meaning. In the next part, we're going even further into full role-play scenarios. You can imagine yourself living through more advanced vocabulary clusters, and eventually a full fluency round pulling everything together. Keep your voice active. Keep speaking every answer out loud. And let's keep going. Type 1 to continue. Let's move into full role-play scenarios now, because this is where all the vocabulary we've built so far gets tested in something closer to a real lived situation, not just isolated sentences. I want you to actually imagine yourself in these scenes as we go through them, not just listen passively. Scenario 1. The job interview. Picture this. You're sitting in a small conference room, across from a hiring manager, a folder with your resume open in front of them. They ask you a fairly common but tricky question. Interviewer, tell me about a time you had to deal with a particularly difficult or overwhelming workload. Now, before I give you a model answer, I want you to pause and try answering this yourself first, out loud, using at least 2 of today's vocabulary words, maybe overwhelmed, prioritize, delegate, or resourceful. Take a moment and speak your answer now. Whatever you said, here's a model answer for comparison, using our vocabulary naturally. Last year, our team lost 2 people right before a major product launch, and honestly, the workload felt incredibly daunting at first. I had to prioritize ruthlessly, focusing only on what would actually affect the launch date, and I delegated smaller tasks to teammates who had more capacity. It was intense, but we got through it, and I learned a lot about staying resourceful under pressure. Notice how naturally this answer flows, connecting real vocabulary to a real story, which is exactly what interviewers respond to. Specific language, not vague generalities like, "It was hard, but I managed." Scenario 2. Giving a presentation. Imagine you're standing in front of a small group presenting quarterly results, and someone in the audience challenges of your number. Anj, one of your numbers. Colleague, I'm a little confused by this figure. Can you clarify where it came from? Here, I want you to respond using to a certain extent, ambiguous, or get to the bottom of. Pause and answer out loud now, as if you were actually standing there, presenting. Good. Whatever you said, here's a natural model response. That's a fair question. The source data was honestly a bit ambiguous when it came in from the regional teams, so to a certain extent, this number is an estimate. We're actively working to get to the bottom of the discrepancy before the next report. Notice how this response stays calm, professional, and precise, exactly the tone advanced vocabulary allows you to strike, even under a slightly uncomfortable, put on the spot moment. Scenario 3. A difficult conversation with a friend. Not everything is professional, so let's shift into something more personal. Imagine a close friend has been distant lately, and you finally decide to bring it up. Friend, hey, is everything okay between us? You've seemed a bit distant lately. I want you to respond here using taken aback, disheartened, or elated, whichever fits the emotional direction you'd naturally take this conversation. Pause and respond now, out loud, as yourself. However you responded, here's one possible direction. Honestly, I was a little taken aback when you said that because I didn't realize it was that obvious. I've just been feeling pretty disheartened about some things at work, and I think I pulled away without meaning to. I'm sorry, that wasn't fair to you. Notice how emotional vocabulary, like this, allows for real vulnerability and precision in a personal conversation, not just surface-level phrases like, I'm fine or I don't know. Let's do one more role play, and this time, a longer one. with an explicit role switch built in, similar to the technique we practiced earlier. Scenario: a team meeting where priorities need to shift suddenly. Allerger: I know we plan to launch next Monday, but the client just requested 3 major changes. I need everyone to be flexible. Team member: you pause and respond here first, out loud, using prioritize, streamline, or on the same page. Now, here's how this conversation might continue naturally, analoger. Good point. What do you think we should cut first if we need to protect the timeline? Pause again and answer as yourself, deciding what you'd prioritize in this imaginary scenario, out loud, denaloger. That makes sense. Let's touch base again tomorrow morning to make sure we're all on the same page before we tell the client anything. Notice, across that entire exchange, you were speaking, responding, and thinking directly in English in real time, under simulated pressure, using vocabulary that would have taken most learners several seconds of internal translation to produce. That gap is exactly what's closing the more you practice this way. Now, let's expand our vocabulary one more time into a cluster we haven't touched yet. Words for describing ideas, plans, and decisions, since this comes up constantly in both work and daily life, and it's another area where basic vocabulary quietly limits how sophisticated you sound. First word: viable. This means something is capable of working successfully, practical, and realistic enough to actually happen. For example, working from home 4 days a week isn't a viable option for our team, given how much in-person collaboration we need. Repeat: viable. Notice the stress: viable. Let's contrast it immediately with its opposite: unrealistic, which means not practical, not likely to actually happen given the circumstances. For example, finishing the entire project in 1 week is honestly unrealistic, given the current team size. Try building a sentence using these 2 words yourself, out loud, describing any plan or idea, real or imaginary, using both viable and unrealistic. Next word: to weigh the pros and cons. This phrase means to carefully consider the advantages and disadvantages of something before making a decision. For example, before accepting the new job offer, I really needed to weigh the pros and cons. The salary was better, but the commute was much longer. Repeat: weigh the pros and cons. Here's a quick dialogue using several of these decision-making words together. Person A: are you seriously considering moving to a different city for this job? Person B: I am. I've been weighing the pros and cons for weeks now. Person A: and? Is it viable financially? Person B: surprisingly, yes. The cost of living is actually lower there, which helps a lot. Person A: what's holding you back then? Person B: honestly, just leaving my friends behind feels like the unrealistic part to accept emotionally, even if it makes sense on paper. Next word: a game changer. This phrase describes something that significantly and positively changes a situation, often unexpectedly. For example, that new software update was a total game changer. It cut our processing time in half. Repeat, a game changer. Notice this phrase is extremely common in modern spoken English, especially set in professional and tech-related contexts. Let's do a quick self-practice moment here. Think of something in your own life, work, study, or daily routine that genuinely changed things significantly for the better, and describe it out loud using the phrase, a game changer. Pause here and speak your sentence now. Excellent. That kind of personal connection, attaching new vocabulary to a real memory or real experience, is exactly what makes a word stay with you permanently instead of fading after a few days. Let's add one final word to this cluster: to reconsider. This means to think again about a decision or plan, usually because new information has come up, possibly leading to a change of mind. For example, after hearing the client's concerns, we decided to reconsider our original timeline. Repeat, reconsider. Notice this word combines re, meaning again, with consider, a pattern that appears in many English words, which can help you guess the meaning of similar words you encounter later, like recess or revisit. Now, let's shift into one more important cluster before we move toward our fluency round. Commonly confused words, expressions that even fairly advanced learners frequently mix up, which can quietly undermine how polished your English sounds, even when your vocabulary is otherwise strong. Let's start with a pair that trips up a huge number of learners: affect versus effect. Affect is almost always a verb meaning to influence something. Affect is almost always a noun meaning the result of that influence. For example, the weather can affect your mood. That's the verb. The weather had a strange effect on my mood today. That's the noun. Repeat both sentences after me. The weather can affect your mood. Now, the weather had a strange effect on my mood. Next pair, economic versus economical. Economic relates to the economy in general, business, trade, money at a large scale. Economical means something is efficient with money, cost-effective, thrifty. For example, the economic situation in the country has improved this year. Versus, buying in bulk is a more economical choice for a large family. Notice how different these meanings actually are, despite looking almost identical on the page. Next pair. Sensible versus sensitive. Sensible means having good judgment, practical and reasonable. Sensitive means easily affected, emotionally, or physically delicate. For example, it was a sensible decision to leave early before the storm got worse. Versus, he's quite sensitive about feedback on his writing, so choose your words carefully. Try building your own 2 sentences right now, out loud, one using sensible, one using sensitive, describing anything from your own life. One more confused pair before we move on, to lie versus to lay. This one confuses even native speakers constantly. Lie means to rest in a horizontal position, and it doesn't take an object, you simply lie down. Lay means to put something down, and it requires an object, you lay something down. For example, I'm going to lie down for 20 minutes. Versus, please lay the documents on my desk. Repeat both. I'm going to lie down. Now, please lay the documents on my desk. Notice the past tense makes this even trickier, since the past tense of lie is actually lay, which is exactly why so much confusion exists around these two words, even among native speakers. All right, take a breath. That confused word section is genuinely one of the densest parts of this lesson. So, nice work staying with it. Let's pause here for just a moment, a calmer beat, before we push into the final stretch. If you're sitting down, relax your shoulders for a second, take one slow breath in, and let it out. We've covered a huge amount of real, usable vocabulary today, and everything from here forward is about consolidating it, making sure it actually sticks. Let's do one more mini role play before the fluency round, combining several vocabulary clusters rotas together in a single flowing conversation, the way real conversations actually mix topics rather than staying neatly organized. Imagine you're catching up with a friend you haven't seen in a while over coffee, friend. So how's work been? Last time we talked, you mentioned things were pretty stressful. Pause here and respond as yourself, out loud, trying to naturally include at least 2 or 3 vocabulary words from anywhere in today's lesson. Whatever feels natural to you, whatever you said, here's one possible natural response for comparison. Honestly, it's been a lot. There was a stretch where I felt completely overwhelmed, way too many projects at once. But I sat down with my manager. We weighed the pros and cons of a few different approaches and decided to streamline how our team handles requests. It's been a genuine game changer. I'm not nearly as apprehensive walking into Mondays anymore. Notice how many different vocabulary clusters blended together naturally in just a few sentences. Reaction words, decision-making words, workplace words, all flowing together the way a real conversation actually works, not separated into neat categories. We're approaching the final stretch of this lesson now. Coming up, we're going to do a full fluency round, reviewing everything we've covered today at a faster pace. One more listening and shadowing challenge, a final self-practice exercise. And then I'll give you a specific, measurable way to lock all of this vocabulary into your long-term memory after this video ends. Stay with me. Keep your voice active. And let's finish this strong. Type 1 to continue. All right, we've reached the final stretch, and this is where everything comes together. Let's do our fluency round now. A fast-paced review, pulling together every single expression we've covered today. Spoken in quick succession without long pauses between them, the way a fluent speaker would casually reference several of these words in a single flowing thought. I want you to say each one out loud with me, right as I say it, almost like a rapid echo. Ready? Here we go. Straight through. overwhelmed, apprehensive, elated, taken aback, disheartened, meticulous, forceful, assertive, easygoing, streamline, prioritize, delegate, on the same page, touch base. To a certain extent, I'd argue that on the flip side, that said, daunting, ambiguous, resolve, get to the bottom of it, viable, unrealistic, weigh the pros and cons, a game changer, reconsider, affect, economic, economical, sensible, sensitive, lie, lay, nice work, pushing through that entire list out loud. That's over 30 precise C1 to C2 level expressions. And if you said even most of them with me, your mouth just physically practiced producing this vocabulary at speed, which is a completely different skill from simply recognizing these words when you read them silently. Let's do one more rapid drill. This time, combining vocabulary into quick, complete thoughts, one right after another, so you can hear how naturally fluent speakers chain these expressions together without pausing to translate. Listen, then repeat each one immediately after me. I was completely overwhelmed, so I had to prioritize. Repeat that. She's meticulous, but honestly, quite easygoing about mistakes. Repeat that. To a certain extent, I agree, but that said, it still feels a bit daunting. Repeat that. We need to get to the bottom of this before we reconsider the whole plan. Repeat that. One more time, a little faster. That's exactly the rhythm we're aiming for. Short, connected, natural thoughts, built directly from vocabulary that's now sitting closer to the surface of your active memory than it was an hour ago. Let's do one final shadowing and listening challenge before we close out today's lesson, because I want to leave you with one more genuinely useful piece of connected speech training. Here's a slightly longer, natural-paced sentence, the kind you might actually hear in a real meeting or a real conversation between two fluent English speakers. Listen first, at full natural speed. Honestly, I think, to a certain extent, we need to touch base again before we reconsider the whole approach, because right now the feedback's been pretty ambiguous. Now, don't try to catch every single word perfectly. Just listen for the shape of it, the rhythm, the stress points. I'll say it again. And this time, shadow it, repeating immediately as I speak, overlapping rather than waiting. Ready? Honestly, I think, to a certain extent, we need to touch base again before we reconsider the whole approach, because right now the feedback's been pretty ambiguous. One more time, try to match the natural speed as closely as you can. If that felt fast and a little uncomfortable, that's completely normal, and honestly, it's a good sign. Real conversations move at exactly this speed, and the discomfort you just felt is precisely the gap this kind of practice closes over time, a little more each time you do it. Now, here's your final self-practice exercise for today. And I genuinely want you to carry this one forward after the video ends, because this is the technique that turns everything we've covered from passive knowledge into automatic active vocabulary. For the next few minutes, or even just the next few hours after this video, I want you to narrate small moments of your day silently or out loud, using today's vocabulary wherever it naturally fits. If your inbox is a mess, don't think, "This is annoying." Think and say, even quietly, "This feels a little overwhelming." If a friend describes a plan that doesn't quite work, don't just think, "That's not realistic." Think, "That's not really viable." If you notice someone being extremely careful and detail-oriented, don't just think, "Wow, they're careful." Think, "Wow, they're genuinely meticulous." Let's do one more round of this right now. Together. Look around you, wherever you are, one more time, and construct 2 full sentences out loud, describing your current environment or your current task, using at least 2 words from today's lesson that we haven't used yet in this specific practice moment. Take your time and speak both sentences out loud right now. Whatever you said, notice that you just built spontaneous, unscripted English, live, using advanced vocabulary with 0 preparation and 0 translation happening in the background. That is the entire transformation this channel exists to help you make. Moving vocabulary from something you understand when you read it to something that's simply there, ready, this instant you need it, the same way it is for a native speaker. Before you go, here's your specific challenge for today. And I want this to be measurable, not vague. Choose just 3 words from today's lesson, any 3 that felt most useful or most relevant to your own life. Then, in the comments below this video, write 1 real sentence for each of those 3 words, describing something actually happening in your life right now. Not a random textbook example. Not "she is meticulous," but something true, something yours. That single action, writing 3 real, personal sentences, does more for your long-term retention than passively rewatching this video 5 times, because it forces you to retrieve the word from memory and apply it, which is exactly how Fluent automatic vocabulary gets built. If today's lesson genuinely helped you think a little more directly in English without that quiet translation, delay slowing you down, make sure you're subscribed to Natural Word English, because every single natural video here is built the same way. Real advanced vocabulary attached to real situations, with real speaking and listening practice built directly into the lesson. Not just a list to memorize and forget. And if there's a specific topic or situation you'd like the next lesson to focus on, work meetings, travel, relationships, anything at all, drop it in the comments, because a lot of these lessons come directly from what this community is asking for. You made it through an incredibly dense lesson today. More than 60 expressions, dozens of real dialogues, multiple role-play scenarios, deep pronunciation and connected speech, training, and genuine listening practice, all in one sitting. That's real, serious effort, and it matters. Keep noticing these words around you over the next few days. Keep saying them out loud whenever you get the chance, even quietly to yourself. And keep trusting that this slow, steady process is exactly how fluency actually gets built. One real word in one real context at a time. I'll see you in the next lesson. Until then, keep thinking and keep speaking directly in English.